The winter wind swept across the Arizona Territory in 1883, carrying dust and cold through the small ranching settlement of Red Creek. Most people in town knew Jacob Hayes as a quiet cowboy who kept to himself. He owned a modest ranch outside town, raised horses, and rarely spoke unless there was something worth saying. One evening, Jacob found an Apache woman standing near his barn. She looked exhausted, but there was strength in the way she held herself. Her name was Mara. She had traveled for days after being separated from her people during a violent conflict. Jacob offered her water and food. "You can stay here tonight," he said. Mara looked at him carefully. "Tonight," she repeated. Jacob nodded. "I won't force you to stay longer." The next morning, Mara helped around the ranch. She repaired a broken fence, gathered firewood, and handled an injured horse with remarkable patience. Jacob quickly realized that she was capable of far more than anyone in Red Creek believed. But the town was not welcoming. When Mara entered the general store, conversation stopped. Some people stared openly. Others whispered that Jacob was making a mistake by allowing an Apache woman to live on his property. Jacob heard the comments but refused to argue. Mara heard them too. One afternoon she returned from town carrying a small bundle. "I am leaving," she said. Jacob looked up from the saddle he was repairing. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere I am wanted." Jacob lowered the saddle. "You are wanted here." Mara shook her head. "Your town does not want me." "Then forget the town." She looked toward the ranch house. "Even your house has no place for me." Jacob was silent. She was right. His home had only 2 bedrooms, both filled with his belongings. Mara had been sleeping in a small corner near the kitchen. Jacob felt ashamed. "I'll fix that," he said. Mara frowned. "Fix what?" "A place for you." She shook her head. "I don't need pity." "It isn't pity." "Then what is it?" Jacob looked directly at her. "Respect." The next morning Jacob began building. He didn't build a small shelter behind the barn. He built a proper room onto the ranch house with a wide window facing the mountains, a wooden floor, a fireplace, shelves for her belongings, and a sturdy door she could lock from the inside. Mara watched him work. "You're building all this for me?" Jacob kept hammering. "You said the house had no place for you." "I can sleep anywhere." "I know." "Then why?" Jacob stopped and looked at her. "Because nobody should have to sleep somewhere just because they have nowhere else to go." Mara said nothing. For several weeks Jacob worked from sunrise until sunset. Sometimes Mara helped. She chose the position of the window. She picked the color of the blanket. She carved a small pattern into the wooden shelf. Slowly the room became hers, but Jacob noticed something changing. Mara no longer spoke about leaving. She began planting herbs beside the kitchen. She started helping him with the horses. In the evenings they sat on the porch and watched the sunset. One night Mara asked him a question. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Jacob thought for a moment. "Because when I was young someone gave my family a place to stay after we lost everything." "Who?" "My uncle." "Why?" He said, "Family doesn't always come from the same blood." Mara looked toward the mountains. "My people say something similar." Jacob smiled. "Maybe we're not so different." But trouble arrived before they could enjoy their peaceful life. A group of men from Red Creek came to Jacob's ranch. They were angry that he had allowed Mara to remain there. Their leader, Thomas Reed, stepped forward. "You've made your choice," he said, "but don't expect this town to accept her." Jacob stood on the porch. "I don't need their permission." Thomas pointed toward Mara. "She doesn't belong here." Mara stepped forward. "I never asked to belong to your town." Thomas laughed. "You hear that? Even she knows." Mara looked at him calmly. "I only need to belong somewhere I am respected." Jacob moved beside her. "And she has that here." The men left, but the tension remained. A few days later, Jacob's cattle disappeared. Then someone damaged his fences. Rumors spread that Mara had brought trouble to the ranch. Jacob knew exactly what was happening, but Mara blamed herself. "I should leave." Jacob shook his head. "No, they are hurting you because of me. They are hurting me because they don't like my choice." Mara looked at him. "And what is your choice?" Jacob answered without hesitation. "You." She stared at him. Not as property, not as someone he wanted to control. As a person he had chosen to stand beside. That night Mara went to the new room. She opened the window and listened to the wind. For the first time in years she didn't feel like she was waiting to leave. She felt safe. Weeks later a storm swept across the territory. Lightning struck the barn. Fire spread quickly through the dry hay. Jacob rushed outside. Mara followed. Together they released the horses and moved them to safety. Then part of the barn roof collapsed. Jacob was trapped beneath a wooden beam. Mara ran toward him. "Jacob," she lifted the beam enough for him to crawl free. By sunrise the barn was gone. The next morning several people from Red Creek arrived. Jacob expected criticism. Instead, the town blacksmith brought lumber. The storekeeper brought nails. The old rancher who had once complained about Mara brought 2 horses. "We heard what happened," he said. Jacob looked surprised. "Why help me?" The old rancher looked at Mara. "Because she saved your life." One by one the townspeople began rebuilding the barn. Mara stood quietly watching them. A woman from town approached her. "I owe you an apology." Mara nodded. "You don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do." The woman looked toward the ranch house. "That room Jacob built for you, I thought it was foolish." Mara smiled slightly. "So did I." The woman laughed. Maybe he knew what he was doing. Over the following months, attitudes changed. Mara began helping the town's children learn about plants and horses. She showed ranchers which herbs could be used for simple remedies. People who had once avoided her began asking for her advice, but Mara never forgot why she had stayed. One evening, she stood beside the doorway of her room. Jacob was repairing a saddle nearby. "I have a question," she said. He looked up. "What's that?" "If I had left that first morning, would you have followed me?" Jacob smiled. "No." Mara raised an eyebrow. "No, I would have respected your choice." She smiled. "That is why I stayed." Jacob looked at her. "Because I built you a room." "No." She stepped closer. "Because you gave me a door." A door I could open when I wanted to leave and close when I wanted to stay." Jacob understood. He had never tried to trap her. He had simply given her a choice. Mara placed her hand against the wooden door. "I stayed because for the first time nobody was asking me to stay." Jacob smiled. The Arizona sunset painted the mountains gold. The ranch was still small. The barn was still being rebuilt. The town was still learning. But the room beside Jacob's house stood finished, warm, and filled with things Mara had chosen herself. And every night when she closed that door from the inside, she knew something she had not known in a very long time. She was not there because she had nowhere else to go. She was there because she had finally found somewhere she wanted to be. Jacob never claimed that he had saved Mara. He believed she had saved herself. He had simply given her what everyone deserved, a safe place, a free choice, and a reason to believe that belonging did not have to be earned through suffering. Years later, people in Red Creek would still tell the story of the cowboy who built a room for a woman everyone else wanted gone. But Mara remembered it differently. She didn't remember the walls. She remembered the man who never once locked the door.